All right, let's get into it. Am I being antsy? 9:33 and 50 seconds. Yeah, let's get into it. So thank you everybody for joining PowerShell Community Call, July 2020. We're going to go ahead and hop in. So first things, we're going to talk about new releases of PowerShell, some updates in PowerShell Get 3 land. We've got a pull request that we want to get some feedback on. We'll be talking about the updatable help pipeline. And then, as I said just a minute ago, if you've got any additional questions you'd like answered, go ahead and hop over to issue 257 and post into that thread. We will be addressing that one at the end of this call as well. So first things first, we have shipped 2 new preview releases of the PowerShell 7.1. So definitely go ahead and grab those. You know, this preview 5 release was really a much smaller release. I think that was more about upgrading to a specific version of .NET. But we also had this preview 4 release just 1 week after the last community call that introduced a number of community fixes and some other bug fixes as well. Looks like we're getting a little bit of feedback on the mic. If everybody could just make sure they're muted there. So definitely, you know, nothing major in these builds. Like we haven't, you know, shipped any of the huge new experimental features or anything like that. There will be a couple more of those coming down the pipeline, likely with preview 6. So definitely check those out. But you know, for those that aren't aware of our kind of new release cadence here, we are kind of matching more and more what .NET 5 does, and we intend to ship some release candidates around the same time that they will, and then to GA at the same time as they will. So you know, over the next couple months, you'll start to see those trickle out, and we will lock down and try to ship alongside .NET 5. So you know, we're kind of getting towards the tail end of this one, and you'll start to see Steve and I do some triage around some of the 7.1 consider items that at this point are probably too large for folks to take on, and to move those out to, you know, 7.2 or beyond that as future items. So yeah, definitely keep your eyes peeled. That is the milestone that I'm talking about here. So you know, you'll see this 7.1, 7.2 consider, and generally speaking, these are, you know, a lot of these 7.1 consider are going to get moved forward, possibly even to this future bucket, so that we can you know, make sure that what's coming out in 7.1 is realistic. Anything you wanted to add there, Steve, or anything else?
Add some quick stuff real quick. So yeah, we're definitely working very close with the .NET team so that we have very close alignment with their .NET 5 release. So we are sim shipping with the releases. Now we may skip some of their interim short quick releases because it doesn't really move us forward, and we still incur a cost to manually do the packaging releases and validation. It's much shorter than it used to be, but still a cost. So we have to decide sometimes whether it's worth it to have like a release 2 weeks after a release kind of thing. The other thing I want to mention is that you know, we really appreciate all the work that the community's been doing. But if you're planning on having something that you expect to be in 7.1, the timeline is probably not as long as you think, or as much time as you think you still have left. So at this point in time, .NET 5 is planned to be done towards the end of November. I don't think they've announced like a release candidate date, but if we kind of look at what they've done before, had 2 release candidates, that means that they're likely to have a release candidate 1 in September timeframe, is my guess, which means that we'll probably have a release candidate around September 1st, or not September 1st, but September timeframe, which means that we really don't want to start taking big changes in a release candidate, because we want to really start stabilizing as we get to GA, which means that if you have some features that you are hoping to get into a 7.1, you really should have that kind of done before then, so like August really, and that's just next month. So just keep that in mind as we continue down this path. Again, if you miss 7.1, not a big deal, you'll hit 7.2, and because .NET 6, which is what 7.2 will be based on, is the LTS release, that'll give some more time, and it'll be used by more people potentially. So just keep that in mind.
I'm muted there, sorry. Awesome, thank you, Steve. Great, so yeah, and I think you will see, you know, if anybody's kind of tracked with us before, 6.0, 6.1, 6.2, while we try not to do this, you know, I think it's kind of no secret that there's a lot of work that we do over in the RFC repo that there's a lot of design thinking and conversation that happens there that eventually finds its way over into the engine itself. And you'll probably see some of those experimental features drop in the next preview or two. And so, getting usage at this point in the cycle is extra important so that we can make sure that those experimental features are validated enough or invalidated enough for us to make an informed decision going into the release candidates. So awesome. So I wanted to pop it over to Sydney to give us an update on PowerShell Get 3.0 Preview 6, which I believe just shipped earlier this week or late last week.
Yeah, we recently had our Preview 6 release of PowerShell Get 3.0, which included some new publish functionality, as well as wildcard support for repository search, along with a few other bug fixes. And with that, I kind of wanted to just give you guys an update on the project overall, where we're heading over the next few months, and what you can sort of expect from the migration experience at this point. So we are planning to have, at this point, one more preview release, and then move into our RC phase, and then target a GA, hopefully around the September timeframe. But this is really dependent on how our next releases go and whether or not we're able to meet that bar in terms of quality and limited if or no bugs. So with that, the next preview release will be coming out very shortly. And with that, we will have a bug fix for published PS resource, which was causing an assembly load error. We will allow for relative paths when registering PS repositories. It adds full update functionality. And the big thing with this release too is that it'll be our first release that it will ship in a PowerShell 7.1 preview. So we're hoping to get this updated version of PowerShell Get 3.0 in the very shortly upcoming 7.1 preview release. With this, we've also started to think a lot about our migration story and how we can make that sort of as pain-free of a process as possible. I touched on this a bit in our last community call and briefly in my blog post on our Preview 6 release, but look out for a full blog post sort of outlining the long-term vision. But I still wanted to float it today and explain a little bit about the decisions we've made so far and what we're kind of experimenting with, but also caveat that we understand there are limitations to any sort of migration path and are still very much soliciting feedback and are still holding on to the possibility of totally shifting this. So with that, we have designed a compatibility module, which is called PowerShell Get Compat, and that is available on GitHub in the repo PowerShell/PowerShell Get Compat, and will likely get published to the gallery shortly. And so we plan to use, what this compatibility module does is it creates a mapping between PowerShell Get 2 and below syntax with our 3.0 implementation. So this takes a best effort approach on translating the semantics of the commandlets, but it's important to remember that there were intentional design changes on the inclusions of certain functions and parameters in the refactor. And so it's not a direct conversion, but rather a way to create a system where you're unlikely to break if you have 2.0 syntax, but only the 3.0 module installed. We plan to ship this as a dependency of PowerShell Get 3.0, and at this point, it will be on by default. I think our long-term vision is to transition into a mode eventually where it is not on by default, but can be installed and turned on by users to transition to 3.0 fully. We decided to ship this as a module to sort of distinguish the functionality from the core functionality of 3.0 so that we could track it independently as its own module and really modularize it in this sense that it can be installed or uninstalled and enabled or disabled. The caveat, though, is that if you are using fully qualified module names, that this compatibility module will not necessarily work for you. So we'd love feedback if you are using fully qualified module names if you think that this flow makes sense, if it works for you, and definitely if you test it out when we ship it in PowerShell 7.1 preview releases. So I think that that sort of covers the general gist of what to expect next in PowerShell Get 3.0, but feel free to drop any questions or feedback.
Yeah, and where should they drop that feedback, Sydney, of all those kind of repos you just mentioned? And how did I just end up in this file? Where should they, where of all those places?
I would say go to the PowerShell Get repo, so PowerShell Get, and that will help us sort of centralize a lot of these discussions.
Okay, thank you.
Let me just add one thing. You know, I think with the work that we're doing with the PowerShell Get Compat module, the important thing is this is for transition purposes. Like, we don't want people to depend on those proxy functions going forward. It's really to ease you into a future where we only have PowerShell Get v3 and above. So that's where we're looking for some feedback, because we are prioritizing how we develop those functions. I think Jim was doing a lot of that work, and he's doing some awesome work there. And it's not going to be exact, but you know, we're making some good judgment calls on what we think people really need, so that if you happen to install a future version of PowerShell that doesn't have v2 with it, then ideally it should just work, and then give you time to update your code, so using v3 commandlets only. So.
Yep, it's you know, we'd like to kind of pull the what I like to call like the Indiana Jones switch, you know, with the sandbag and the golden idol or whatever, where we, you know, swap these two things out very quickly and nobody notices. But you know, it's we also recognize it can be very, very difficult to get right. But yeah, it's please give that feedback and let us know, you know, if we can indeed pull that off.
Yeah, and this will definitely be staged. I mean, like, initially we'll probably have to ship the proxy if we don't have v2, and then maybe in some version you have to manually install the compat module because it won't be there. So we'll have to figure that out based on the feedback from the community.
But this is for those that, you know, went through the Azure RM to AZ transition with those PowerShell modules. You know, it's kind of similar here in that, you know, we're trying to provide that bridge back to people so that their scripts can continue to work. But in this case, we're having that bridge turned on by default so that we can try and get to a 3-only world. But
yeah,
we will see if that's that's doable. So awesome! Thank you so much, Sydney. Steve, did you want to talk about this this pull request here?
Yeah, can you open that? Is this the
one you added yesterday?
Yeah, this is. Oh, this is the one. Yeah.
Yep.
So if you actually scroll to the bottom, I'll kind of give the short version first. So basically, as the committee was reviewing,
you wanted this one?
Yeah, but I'll explain some context, because people don't really kind of understand what I'm writing right there. But so we had this early RFC. There's actually RFC 0002, written by, I believe Jason Shirk wrote it as more of a sample RFC, but it was also an idea that we had at the time, like for relaxed splatting or splatting enhancements. So we've been having a lot of discussion in the community about this RFC, because a number of people in the community have actually started submitting pull requests to kind of implement some of those features or some of those ideas. And so, well, I think we'll have a separate update on that. But one of the things that came out of that is we recognize that if you're splatting, like let's say your hash table has a name equals X, but then you also provide a -name Y on a command line after splatting, then today you would actually get an error because name is specified twice. But we're thinking about like, hey, this really is a bug. You know, if you're explicitly putting a -name there, even though it's defined in the hash table, the user probably meant to override that. And there's a lot of legit cases where they may want to do that. You know, you have a complex hash table with a lot of complex parameters, and you just want to override it for one case or something like that. So as we're discussing that, we're like, we all agree, hey, that seems like a bug. It's a case that didn't work before, now we'll make it work. But then as Don was working through his PR, we brought about some other discussions. Like, all right, you know, for simple functions, does it make sense whether or not the order matters? Because simple functions, all parameters are positional. And we kind of decided, you know, from a consistency perspective, from what user expects, the ordering shouldn't matter. But then we look at advanced functions. All right, now does ordering matter here? Because if you look at bash, for example, One common thing that I used to do when I was more prevalently using Bash is I'd have an alias defined for some native command that has a bunch of switches, and then I could always add switches at the end to override anything that's defined in the alias, right? So if I do like an ls -- color as my, and then I have that alias to just ls, I can also override the color if I don't want color, stuff like that. So that was kind of the discussion. So in that sense, it means if you had the parameter first and then the hash table, then in that sense, the hash table value would overwrite your explicit parameter and vice versa. The discussion is this PowerShell-y or not? And I think there's arguments both ways. And actually, I saw that there was already some good community discussion on this. And I think so far, I think 2 or 3 folks that have responded have all sided on ordering shouldn't matter. And I would actually like to just have more people provide some opinions, so we don't necessarily just, do something that aligns with a specific set of folks here. Because whatever decision we make here, it's gonna be hard to change because there'll be a breaking change after that now. So hopefully all that made sense, the explanation. But I do encourage you guys to look at this and put in your own opinion before we put something in. And this will, whatever we decide on, I believe we'll just have Don will update this to be an experimental feature so we can get some feedback as we'll use it in the real world, whether or not order matters one way or the other. And then we'll decide when we get to release candidate which one we stick with.
Yeah, so it was my take here as well, like that order probably shouldn't matter here. I mean, it got a little bit more complicated as we talked about positional parameters in the simple function case, and there is some weirdness around that as well. But I think ultimately, I mean, it was great to get this feedback here, but it was really like I think there was a lot of talk about the usefulness of the ordering. Like, in other words, if I actually, as a user, especially at interactive time or in my profile or something like that, I have some hash table that I can use, sort of splat throughout other places, it might be useful to be able to tack that on at the end. But my take is that there's maybe some other ways to achieve that same thing without necessarily disrupting the ordering of these things. But again, I think there's a lot of different potential ways that people can see this as PowerShell-y or not PowerShell-y.
Like, I think if we decide that ordering matters here, then logically we should just allow explicit overriding in all cases, right? So in the example you have on the screen, like test function -name world -name hello would not be an error anymore and would be allowed if we wanted to say last one wins. Because it doesn't make sense that last one wins in a splitting case, but in a non-splitting case it doesn't work. To me. Right.
So in other words, yeah, which kind of goes along with the way my mental model for splatting, and I suspect that it's the same for many people, although, tell me if I'm crazy here, is that essentially, when you see this at hash, you're thinking, okay, I look at the hash table and I do a conversion where that's basically dropping -name hello into that location. And we're only trying to enable this override where you're doing this mix of a splat and a named parameter. But like if you were to do -name world -name hello, if we made that work where like last one wins, then it would make sense for the hash table ordering to do the same. But I don't think that necessarily makes sense to do of having -name specified twice. It's somewhat error prone.
Yeah, and I would actually just add one more thing that I believe was brought up in the committee meeting. It's like in some ways, if we say ordering doesn't matter, then it's kind of like an extension of PS default parameters, right? Where if you have the default parameters defined, then that just fills in whatever is not defined. And then if you have splatting, that kind of now does another round of default parameters, if you will. And then the -name is always explicit and overrides it, regardless of where it sits.
Right. Which I think is at least easy to document and comprehend. So anyway, please
lead the witness, but.
Yeah, well, I am. But anyway, hop into this one.
I try to be partial there with my.
Please tell me if I'm crazy. No, I think there's a lot of ways to look at this, and like I said, I think there's value in being able to do that override via a splat, but I don't necessarily know if that's the best way to do it is via ordering. So, hop into here and provide some feedback, please, and let us know what you think. Awesome. I want to move on to Jason. There was a really good question in the original issue here about some stuff to do with updatable help, and I think Jason, it's a good opportunity, Jason and Sean, for you both to provide an update on the overall work that we've been doing with the updatable help pipeline. So I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, this is, first of all, a big shout out to Jeff Hicks for continuing to bring these kind of issues up. And I'm really excited to be able to talk about this. Now, just to state the problem, most of you already know that the idea is that you should be able to receive updatable help so that your help that you see in console and terminal matches what you would see updated on the web. Well, that hasn't been happening for a very long time, as in years. So let me just start off from the beginning by saying, we have a new pipeline that is working, that is in place for updatable help, and we have moved the Windows PowerShell documentation to it. Now, just to let you know what's going on further beyond that, we are going to move the rest of PowerShell to it.
Not the Windows. PowerShell 5.1.
PowerShell 5.1. Yeah, I think that's what I was. The Windows PowerShell 5.1 is.
Yeah, not to be confused with the Windows PowerShell docs repo mentioned in the issue. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. Thanks for correcting me. So we are going to move the rest of PowerShell version 6 and 7 over as well. And we are working with other teams to move them over, like Office PowerShell and Windows PowerShell. Now, this particular issue, though, that gets brought up is actually we have. The issue that was commented on was the about_ files. And let me just explain that we discovered that we had a bug in how the about_ files were being rendered. Now, just so that you know, we do have that bug. We did identify it, and it's being worked on right now. Now, here's the good part. You want to know when it's all going to be fixed. And since we're working on this bug fix, I'm really hesitant to give out any kind of dates, and I know how frustrating that is, so let me just tell you what I'm thinking. We're working on this bug, and we anticipate to have the about_ bug fixed, hopefully by the end of the month, which means the about_ help for Windows PowerShell 5.1 should hopefully be working in the month of August, so next month. I will definitely update everybody in the next community call on the status of that, but that's what I'm currently thinking right now, as we continue to onboard the rest of the PowerShell versions and some other Windows PowerShell teams as well.
Yeah,
go ahead, Sean.
I was just going to answer some of the questions in the issue there. What does an admin script to do that doesn't have get? Well, the process I was describing in that blog post is a very manual process, and you don't have to have get to download the markdown from GitHub. You can just go to GitHub, and the web UI allows you to download the whole repo as a zip file. For number 3 there, Jason already mentioned, we're working on onboarding the other PowerShell repos to the new pipeline. But that's a work in progress over the next couple of months.
Yeah, so huge thanks to these guys. I mean, there's been a ton of work going on behind the scenes. Anybody that's ever talked to me about documentation knows that this has been an insanely bothersome thing for me for a very long time, and it's going to be really awesome once we finally do have all the awesome new content that is online in your updatable help console, and that will continue to light up over the course of the next couple of months. Just to clarify, Jason, you were saying the about topics we're hoping to have them fixed by end of August.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Yeah, and I think just to reiterate what Sean says here, this blog post I think was really intended more as a stopgap for the fact that we knew eventually we wanted to get this updatable help pipeline fixed. Like, that's not the ideal scenario, but it was a way for people who wanted that help or needed that help in the box to get it there. Awesome. So, does anybody else, you know, we exhausted our agenda here, but I just wanted to give an opportunity to folks on the call and on the team to raise any other things that they want to bring to the community's attention.
I've got one thing on the Cloud Shell side.
Oh, great. Go for it, Danny.
So we will have a Cloud Shell update that will roll out shortly, so sometime next week, to allow Cloud Shell to connect to isolated virtual networks within Azure. So if you have any environments that have a private VNet, we will now be able to inject a Cloud Shell container into that VNet. This will be in a preview for a few weeks, and then we'll roll it out as a GA feature later on. There are some limitations on regions just for the preview release, but those will be removed down the line. So stay tuned. I should put out a blog post and a tweet once the feature is available.
Awesome. Very exciting for those of you working with Azure Cloud Shell and VNets. Thank you, Danny. Anybody else? Great. Well, if anybody thinks of anything, feel free to interrupt me along the way here. I'm going to pop into the questions that we have answered or that we have asked here in the issue, and then we'll look at the ones in the Teams chat as well. So first, I did want to touch on this one from Keylasuit. So here's my big thing about RFCs, GitHub discussions, and all this. So I'm desperately close to shipping a new RFC SME sort of subject matter expert team process. Steve's gonna grimace because we don't necessarily gonna call that that when we go out with it. But basically, we have a new way that we want to sort of decentralize decision-making processes among folks that work in the PowerShell repo and in the committee, and sort of streamline some of the problems that we've seen with the current RFC system and the way that things get kind of bottlenecked or over discussed, too early in their development or discussion, or under discussed and then suddenly kind of pushed through. So there's a lot of these kind of issues today with that. I will be totally honest. None of those issues today really have to do with tooling, right? So it's not really so much a hey, what we have today can't be workable, but it's more of an issue of the ways that authorities are making the decisions, right? So if I could say it a different way, it's a people problem, right? Like we currently sort of insist that a bunch of things all get written to RFC and pushed up to the committee. And we also sort of don't have any filter for preventing things from coming up to the committee. And given the backlog of issues that we have, the backlog of RFCs that we have, I'm very wary to move over to a tool that will create sort of a new data set of issues and, in this case, technically discussions, but really just issues in a different format that then become a peer and a sort of new side-by-side backlog with an existing one that we already have. Now, this is not to say that we can't or shouldn't use GitHub discussions at some point in the future, but I suspect that the gains of switching to a new tool are probably iterative. Again, it's really just a sort of a threading and voting model, as opposed to what we have today. But those aren't really where we have the issues in building consensus. It's really today about who is the person that consensus needs to be built with, and how are they sort of being brought to the fold to make those decisions, and who are the people that are parts of those groups that get to make those decisions. So, I don't want to rule it out, but it's also, I don't want to oversell this as something where, hey, there's this magic bullet, this tool got designed for using RFCs, and therefore, it's going to magically fix the way that our governance operates, because the reality is that that's kind of not the case. I know that .NET is experimenting with this tool. I will be totally frank that I think that .NET's governance is probably in a better state than ours today, and is in a much cleaner place where they could potentially move to a new tool that can kind of give them those iterative benefits and make some of those things easier. But it's not something that I want to inject kind of in flight with the process updates that we want to make. But again, that's kind of my opinion. There's been folks within the team that sort of said, you know, I don't get what you're saying, Joey, and you know, we like it makes a lot of sense to move you know, to discussions for RFCs. And again, I think that absolutely could be the case. I just don't think it's the highest order bit right now in improving the main problems with our kind of RFC approval and feature approval process. But Steve, did you have anything you wanted to add, or anybody else in the team?
Yeah, I guess I'll just say a few things. Like we're already experimenting with moving some of the discussions from a formal RFC to issues, right? Which is why, if the community may have noticed, I've opened some pretty detailed issues, like with the call native operator and also the ANSI rendering ones, where I try to kind of lead by example here and provide like a ton of details, maybe too much, I don't know. And then more importantly, like demo.txt to show like, here's what the user experience will look like, to kind of have that discussion in issue before taking the time to actually formally write an RFC. As far as GitHub discussions, I think it's another tool that we should definitely evaluate. But I think I agree with Joe that we don't want to necessarily move to the latest shiny thing and then decide that isn't the best thing for us and then move to something else again. I think that causes confusion. So we'll definitely keep an eye out on that, and we'll, you know, we work closely with the .NET team, so we'll hear from their experience, and if it makes sense, then we can always move to it in the future. I don't think that is a problem. But right now we're looking at leveraging just issues, which has its own limitations, like there's no threads and stuff like that, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, I recognize that there is a difficulty in kind of keeping track of conversations, especially in PRs and issues, and, you know, the way that you sort of get that, oh, there's 60 hidden comments in the middle, and now suddenly, you know, you realize that there's hundreds of paragraphs of discussion that you haven't read. But I don't think that, you know, I think the bigger thing in regards to dealing with that volume of feedback is adding additional eyeballs to be responsible for looking at that feedback rather than simply reordering that feedback on the screen. I don't think that necessarily makes things more palatable, because these decisions, like they're very multi-dimensional, right? It's not a matter of like, you know, we've got this one right now going on with a native call operator, right? Which we didn't touch on today, but, you know, folks definitely should pop into that one and you know, give some feedback if you have some. But you know, this is without getting too far into the weeds here. Like, you know, there's a question about whether or not we should have a new operator, what the operator should be, you know, what the point of the operator is. There's you know, different behaviors of the operator. There's whether or not, you know, old behaviors should be broken. And a lot of these are conflated with each other, right? It's not a straight up or down, like I can make each of these decisions independently in a vacuum. And so, you know, you're still going to have difficulty kind of weaving this overall thought process, which is why eventually, you know, we have to have folks go and actually write a document that cohesively says, this is the plan, and then to, you know, to rationalize that plan and go execute on it without having, you know, kind of 100 different side opinions coming in from the outside. But that, you know, someone still has to kind of do that overall rationalization. So, again, I think GitHub discussions looks crazy cool. I mean, I'm really like, I'm a huge fan of everything GitHub's been putting out, but it's just something that you know, we kind of will look at when we've solved a little more of the rest of the issues here. Cool. Don't see anything on that particular one, so I'm going to hop to the next question here. Any chance we can touch on 13042, just the upstream change in guidance to module authors? Yeah, so this one, I still really want to go back and talk to .NET. So quick summary of what this is here. It looks like .NET removed a bunch of stuff in .NET 5 around WinRT. You know, these are these specific Windows native, Windows runtime assemblies. I would like to get more context on why they did this. But it does look like there is a workaround today where folks could, you know, take the assemblies that are no longer included and add them to their modules. I think the person who actually asked this question, WinDOS, was also saying that they would go and create a module module update to the module that they broke in to include the assemblies. I think this is a great example of why it's awesome to test, your modules continually using the latest preview builds to kind of catch some of these things, because this is one of those ones where, if someone hadn't raised this issue, this totally would have flown by my radar for sure, and probably all of our radars within the team. So I do want to go again, kind of find out what the context is for them doing that, what the right guidance is from .NET. I know there's some talk about, hey, like how small are these assemblies, and are they worth including in PS7.1? We currently said that no, we don't think it is, but it sounds like maybe that's impacting more people than we realized, and maybe that's something we got to go reassess. So again, I want to get kind of more of the thinking from .NET before I totally draw a line in the sand. But yeah, Steve, this is something we should talk to the .NET folks about for sure.
All right, let me. I want to add some context here because I did talk to the .NET team about this specific thing. Oh,
perfect.
Yeah, so I don't know all the details of their decision, but I think a lot of it is based on the fact that they're trying to have .NET itself be more. The APIs included in .NET are inherently cross-platform compatible, where WinRT obviously will never be. So that was one of the decisions, but also their focus wasn't necessarily on PowerShell, but on like C# authors, where if you are a C# author using .NET 5, then you can just do a reference to two nupkegs on NuGet.org to get back WinRT API functionality. So from their perspective, that is what they believe is the right solution for them. So that is actually the workaround I provided in this thread to Windows for his burnt toast module, and he got that working. So then the question is, like, we discussed with the community to say, hey, does it make sense for us to actually ship the WinRT stuff with PowerShell 7.1, or do we want people to kind of include those assemblies with their modules all the time? And to be honest, I don't know how many modules actually depend on the WinRT stuff. I'm only aware of the one because it was brought up as an issue. The ones that are in Windows, like I think Joel has brought like Apex and stuff, I don't know if those are going to be issues at this point in time. I haven't tested it. But I think our current position, and again, we're open for feedback here, is that module authors, if you're a C# module, then yeah, you just do a reference, and then they'll be, and if you do the publish, those assemblies will be pulled into your publish path, and you just distribute that with your module. For script module authors like Burnt Toast, then you would explicitly have a copy of those with your module and distribute it that way, and that should still work with 7.1. So I think that's our current position, kind of aligned with .NET 5 at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, we're trying to snap to what .NET thinks is the best thing to do here, and kind of align with them over time, because when we don't, we kind of get burnt a lot of the time, and in terms of like, hey, maybe they're gonna support this less and less going forward or something like that. It's not to say that we know that to be true here, but like it's helpful when we kind of align with them strategically. So but at the same time, like if this turns out to be massively breaking to folks, it's definitely something we can discuss is bringing that in if they're potentially very small. But I think current thinking is not to.
And let me add just one more thing. Like, one of the things we want to do in PowerShell Get v3 plus, meaning not in 3.0, is to allow module authors to declare NuGet.org dependencies, and then we would actually handle that at install PS resource time. That way, you also wouldn't necessarily have every module carry its own copy, but that's something that we're not going to have in 3.0. It'll be 3.1 at the earliest.
Yeah, I'm going to call that 3.1 plus, 3.1 and above. Yeah. Cool. So working our way down here, and I'm looking at time. We got about 18 minutes. So could one register one's GitHub repository, install a script from there using the new PowerShell Get module? I don't believe this works today, but this looks like a totally cool scenario, and maybe file this one on the PowerShell Get repo if there's not already an issue for that. But that would be kind of cool. I know more and more package managers are kind of looking at doing that. When we first started, it would have been totally out of the question. I remember this being raised back in the PS Get 1.0 days, and GitHub was not something that was maybe as totally ubiquitous or trusted, and certainly not owned by Microsoft. But yeah.
I will just add quickly that there is an issue open for this, so go ahead and upvote it if this is something you're excited about, and it is something that Amber and I have talked a little bit about and are investigating at this point.
Great. So Ilya said he pulled some PRs to migrate JSON commandlets to the new .NET API and pulled some PRs to improve file system provider. Is the community and Microsoft team interested in continuing to work on this? So Steve, do you want to speak to this one a little more? Because I think we've discussed this one a little bit, but it's not exactly closed.
Well, I think, well, first off, I appreciate the work that Ilya has been doing on this. I guess, first off, I think the challenge is a lot of the work.
I'll say I appreciate all the work Ilya does.
Yes.
Holy crap, Ilya does so much. ISASNOP, for those that don't know, is does so much work in our repository. So thank you, Ilya.
So I think the challenge for us is that a lot of the work the team has been working on has not necessarily been in the PowerShell repo. You know, we got and we can. I think there's a question later on about secret management. We can touch upon that later, but there's a lot of other work like in the Jupyter notebooks and editor services and all this stuff. So I think part of the challenge right now is we're a little bit resource constrained to pay attention to a lot of the community PRs, to be honest. So I can't make a commitment that we're going to get around to this in 7.1. Well, for sure, try to make it like one of the things I'm hoping in the 7.2 timeframe is that we will probably spend more time on the community stuff than our own stuff, which means that we may have less features. But that might be the right thing to do, just to get those in, because I know some of these are getting some of these pull requests are getting quite old, and we don't want that. So we'll have to figure it out. We may just have to review some of the specific ones that Ilya has open and see which ones we can take into 7.1 versus potentially pushing it out to 7.2. So.
Yeah, but I think more specifically, and yeah, totally agreed across the board on all that. But I think with this one in particular, him talking about both the JSON commandlets on the new .NET API and the new file system provider, these are places where we've had huge issues, right? I mean, I think the JSON commandlets are actually doing pretty great right now with Newtonsoft, but there is a desire, to move away from that Newtonsoft dependency and just use the straight up .NET stuff. But the file system provider in particular, we've wanted to make huge sets of fixes to that for a long time, but we don't see that as really doable without making very massive breaking changes. And so we've had a lot of discussion about, some kind of file system V2 provider that people could opt into, or that could be an experimental feature over some longer period of time. And I do think that we probably should have some kind of issue tracking that, so that we can have the discussion with Ilya and potentially others about how we might, it might be the same for the JSON commandlets, where we kind of have like a JSON V2, and people opt into that thing over time, because these are places that are massively used today by PowerShell users, and even the most obscure edge behaviors are actually depended on out in the wild, not to break, and we don't want to mess with those people. So
yeah, I think for the file system V2 concept, I opened an issue a while back, so there's already an issue open, and I encourage people to have discussion about that. I agree with what Joey's saying, is like, rather than doing a lot of small changes in the existing file system provider and incurring the cost of reviewing that for breaking changes and whatnot, it's probably better to spend time looking at a completely new one, and then figuring out how to do that transition as well. I think for the JSON commandlets, I'm actually wondering whether or not we should defer that, because I think a lot of that started because of the problem where modules depend on Newtonsoft JSON different versions. So we had this whole problem with different modules trying to load different versions of some of the PowerShell loads, so that if we remove that dependency, at least PowerShell wouldn't have a conflict with those modules. Those modules may have conflict with each other. Rob has already published a blog on how module authors could isolate that themselves, and we are evaluating some ideas on how to make this as a generalized solution in a future version of PowerShell, wouldn't be in 7.1. So, it's a priority call. I'll just go back to what Jeffrey said. It's like, to ship is to choose. In this case,
yes,
we have to make some choices here.
Awesome, thanks, Steve. So moving on to this one, so this says, can you talk about any improvements for IntelliSense in remote SSH to Windows targets? Very delayed. Also, Control-Shift-F won't format code in remote SSH, and it looks like key bindings in general are a problem there as well. So I believe, I just, in seeing this remote SSH spelled like this, I believe they're actually talking about the Control-Shift-F they're talking about the VS Code remote connection thing. That's like, I know Tyler, you're a huge fan of that. Do you know, Tyler, about IntelliSense on Windows being an issue there, or know anything about that?
No, I just opened an issue on. I would just open an issue on the remote SSH repo and start there.
Okay.
Because like it's kind of like transparent to us.
Do you maybe have a link you can drop in the chat or something for me, so I can just add that to the notes here? Where that one might be housed.
Yeah,
I think it's probably, you know what, it's probably here, and then there's probably a repo right there. So it's right there. Is this it?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you're having IntelliSense problems in VS Code with the remote SSH extension.
It's like, obviously it's going to be slower because it's going over remote, right? But
yeah, I mean, it's
incredibly slower.
But if I am misunderstanding you, and this is about IntelliSense in the local case, or in the the sort of quote unquote dumb terminal case, let us know as well. Ilya says, can we implement this based on YAML.net in a 7.1 milestone? So this is around, hey, should we have convert from YAML, convert to YAML? Our current case right now is that unless there is an extremely high, and yes, I see 139 upvotes, but we basically, like, we want people to use new modules, right? Like, we don't want to put a ton of new commandlets into PowerShell itself, unless it's sort of replacing existing behavior. And we want to understand better sort of what the sort of blocker is for using stuff from the gallery here, right? So the fact that we have a PS YAML and a PowerShell YAML both out there. I've used both of these in the past. They work great. Like there's not really necessarily a I just don't know. I mean, and I haven't read a ton of this issue. It looks like some people are talking a little bit about official support and things like that, but I think that this really, like one of the big things we really don't want to do right now is add new dependencies. People are here joking about like a Newtonsoft.yaml, and I think there are kind of two different ones out there in the wild, and we don't really, we certainly can't invest as our team into a YAML library, and I don't think that us picking between these two is necessarily the best case here. But I will go ahead and read some of this. I mean, I think that there are certainly probably some red herrings in this issue about whether or not YAML's any good, or YAML versus JSON, and why would Microsoft care more about one versus the other? And really, this is just about us kind of trying to hold the line on adding additional stuff. Like we just had this WinRT conversation, right? Like we'd like to get those assemblies out if .NET's getting those assemblies out, just because we'd like to sort of clean things up in general. So yeah, I'd likely this is not going to happen. I mean, it's certainly not going to happen in the 7.1 milestone, but we'd need to see additional kind of movement in the YAML ecosystem in order for us to commit to this in the future.
Yeah, let me just add, like, I think anyone looking at a comparison with like XML and JSON, I think those are there in PowerShell by default, primarily for legacy reasons, right? The direction we're trying to head is actually try to make PowerShell smaller, and that people can rely on the gallery and PowerShell Get as a way to increase your surface area for commands and APIs as necessary. And then in the future, we could have meta modules on the gallery. We talked about this before, where if you want the kitchen sink and everything with it, then you just install one module, you get everything back. Like that's the world we kind of want to move towards. That way, you don't need to always have everything all the time. But if you wanted it, you could get it. And having a YAML module on the gallery would work in that world.
Yeah.
I can take the next question from Maximo.
Well, Azure, you
yeah,
can?
Azure Second Windows Admin Center. So we've had conversations with Azure Stack team, and we've had conversations with the Windows Admin Center team. I don't think we can announce anything that they haven't announced yet. So I guess the only thing we can say is we've had conversations with them.
Yeah, I mean, unless unless there's been something super secret I don't know about, I think we could say, you know, hey, help us understand those scenarios. We can go push harder on certain things. I don't even think that there are unannounced plans unless Steve can wink at me on the side. But you know, I've certainly talked to both about things, and it's you know, we've looked at it, but the value wasn't necessarily huge. And you know, Windows Admin Center in particular needs like a very standard target to be available. You know, but as we kind of do more of the work around being able to bootstrap PowerShell 7 easier onto Cerber, it's possible that can, you know, be more ubiquitous or easier for Windows Admin Center to have there. Because today they do, you know, require that you go and put 5.1 WMF on the box if you're on a lower OS and that sort of thing. So, you know, we might be able to just change that requirement to just bring it in 7. But we will we can look at it again. When will .NET 5 be released? If you rewind, I think Steve may have said, but I don't know that it's our place to say right now.
No,
also,
that was public. So .NET 5 already published their roadmap, so that
okay.
they're planning on November release for the GU. Yeah,
I know. I mean, dates change. I know for sure end of year, right? We can like that's their new cadences, annual releases. So. And we don't like making December releases for the most part. People like going out for the holidays.
Well, making a December release means that you're going to slip into January.
Yes, or you're going to ship something that needs a bug fix release in, you know, on Christmas, right?
Yeah.
Can we consider this for 7.1 or 7.2, please? Also clean up, but y'all know about that. Don't know what timelines lines look like, but you know, so Vex, we need to go back and look at Dispose. Apologies. I don't know where we left it last. I could have sworn that we had made a call on that and we were good with it. But
you might be just waiting on a PR review, not on committee on the cleanup one.
Okay. This was plus equal and minus equal to I don't know anything about this one.
This Steve, is a newer one. This is you could call it syntactical sugar. Again, I think for this one, we just need to kind of wait for, I don't think there's anything controversial that requires even committee to weigh in. This is just going to have to wait for normal PR review. And I know you're kind of asking for a priority here. And I think when the team can get to it, we'll try to get to it.
Got it. We are definitely going to run out of time, so I'm going to keep this moving pretty fast here, I think. There was a ask to possibly fix a string that currently has Windows PowerShell core. Looks right to me, Maximo. Just maybe just submit the PR possibly, or this seems pretty.
If that is in PowerShell 7, then that's somewhere in our repo.
Yes.
I thought we did a scrub where anything that is explicit Windows PowerShell we left. Otherwise, if it's generic, it should have just been PowerShell. So.
Yeah, and then there's a question about maybe whether we should change PowerShell core to PowerShell. I'd rather not go and change the log provider folder again, and additionally, we still do want to use core to differentiate between Windows PowerShell here to make the distinction. So I think probably that one will stay the same, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a breaking change. Like if we were going to make the change, we should take it in 7.0.
Yep. Yep, November OK, it was published. Good idea to link to those docs in Windows PowerShell. Agreed. News on secret management. Sydney, do you want to talk to that real quick?
Yeah, just super quick. The announcement is that don't have too much of an announcement right now. The big takeaway is that we have not in any way abandoned this project and are in fact very actively been working on it over the past few months. So still look forward to more announcements and releases in the future.
Yep, this is we got to get this one right, and we are highly committed to getting it right. So it's a lot of work is still happening, and you'll see something soon. Cool. So yeah, there is this additional issue on the WinRT, and this actually is something that we got to go back and talk about as well. And thank you for reminding me here, Vex, which is that some of the Windows modules actually take a dependency on this. But it's unclear to me whether or not we can, have those be in Windows, or we can find them somewhere in Windows, or we need to redistribute them, or they're, so we'll look at that again. Update help's been fixed. Yay. Sean, you responded to this with a good answer. Thank you. When will the Azure shell be updated to the latest PowerShell GA? Danny, do you want to speak to this one? I think we are pretty close, right?
Yeah, I responded a little bit later. Yeah, so generally we update after each release. So each PowerShell release will usually include that in our next rollout. Right now we're working on some kind of all up larger image changes. So some tools are a little out of sync, and that's just because we're working on some larger image changes that require us to kind of lock on a version while we're working on the change. So there should be an update soon, but there's not a specific date. But it's just a minor version change. I think it's 7.00 and right now it's 7.02. So it's a minor version change.
Awesome. And thank you, Vex, here for responding with some of the empathy around, kind of PRs and issues. And yeah, this is exactly, you're saying, we're going to need a pretty clear process to follow if we, start having folks in the community help out with PR reviews and that sort of thing. And it's absolutely true. And I think, this is why it's taken us so long to get to a place where we have something we're happy to propose publicly, because, it's like I hate high process overhead, but then on the flip side, as soon as we kind of reduce the process in certain places, we suddenly find ourselves in a position where we're accidentally shipping breaking changes and things like that. And I think the reality is that the platform engine, getting some feedback again, if somebody could just make sure their mic's muted there. We really like a lot of what we're talking about here, right, is about reducing the churn of what's happening in the PowerShell repo, right? Increasing the amount of experimentation in other repositories, in modules in the gallery, in experimental features, all these places where we can be a little looser, so that we can, really constrain the set of things that need the most expensive part of the process to things like the PowerShell language and, the parameter binder and the file system provider and things that really do have to be unbroken and well maintained within the PowerShell engine. So appreciate you understanding there, and we will have something to share very soon. So awesome. We are 1 minute over time. I want to thank everybody for the awesome questions. I apologize if there were any that got published here that we weren't able to answer, but hopefully folks were using the GitHub repo to ask those. You can always find us on Twitter or file issues in the appropriate repositories. So thanks so much, everybody, and have a great rest of your week.
Bye.